So the latest figures out of last Friday's Commitment of Traders, or CoT report, and you can see that in the case of the US dollar index, they actually reduced their long positions, but they reduced their short positions even more, and that kind of took the bias up to 71%. So heavy long territory for the US dollar. They remain bullish, but let's break down the remaining FX majors, and you can see that in the case of the euro, majority short consistently throughout this period, and they've actually upped that bias slightly, whereas in the case of the pound, they shifted to bullish towards the end of last year, and they've upped that bias since to about 63%. Now, when it comes to Safehaven, this is where it starts to get interesting because we know there are some big, significant risk-related moves, and when we take a look at the Japanese yen, they were holding opposite bias. Majority short yen, majority long franc. They reduced that bias slightly when it comes to the Swiss franc, and they're much closer towards the middle. But we know that in the case of the yen, it was a clear underperformer last week, whereas the franc relative outperformer in the FX market. So they actually got that too right in the sense of being on opposite sides when it comes to safe haven currencies. What about commodity currencies? With the Canadian dollar, they continue to move towards the middle, not that far off from shifting to majority short. Whereas when it comes to the Australian dollar, it was a real underperformer last week. It did move even lower, and you can see that they not only continue to hold a majority short bias, they up that bias slightly, whereas the New Zealand dollar, they've increased it from majority short 55% to about 63%. Now in oil, they're holding an extreme long bias to 78%. Last week was somewhat bullish for oil. However, this weekend gap lower tested them once again, and not just CoT, by the way, but even our clients holding an extreme long bias of 78%. But where they haven't been tested is in precious metals, and that's because it's this big move that we saw in gold, surging towards 1680. They've been holding this entire time, extreme long bias, upping that bias to 88% last week. In the case of silver, extreme long, 78%. Platinum, extreme long, although they did reduce their bias slightly, they're still in extreme long territories. And when it comes to palladium, which witnessed record highs last week, you can see heavy long 66% and unchanged. So real beneficiaries when it comes to precious metals. And indices hasn't really worked in their favor. NASDAQ, they raised their bias to a 57%, whereas in the case of the Dow, although they reduced their bias slightly, still in extreme long territories. And when it comes to the S&P, at a slight long 53%. All tested this morning with this weekend gap lower by the significant risk-off moves that have seen investors dump riskier assets in favor of safe haven.